This is a show about getting spooked for fun, and neither one of the hosts are associated with the attractions discussed in any way, except for those skeletons in Devin's closet. Some topics may go from ghoulish to ghastly, so viewer discretion is advised. Welcome to the Great American Scream.
Hello, and welcome back to the Great American Scream. My name is Adam O'Connell, and if you will notice, I am doing the intro today, and also usually I get introduced second, and that's because we have a very special guest today to talk about a very exciting topic. So hello, special guest. Special guest, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. My name is Ezra Fisher. I am Devin Wright's partner, roommate, and lifelong critique. Devin, this morning, I noticed he was gone and a hole had opened up in our wall that was exactly his silhouette. I assume everything's fine and he's probably just out on a walk. So today we are talking about one of my favorite horror icons. He is a horror mangaka, which is a comic writer, illustrator. His name is Junji Ito. Yeah, and it's I think it's pretty ironic that Devin's disappearance into a hole in the wall is what brought you onto the show, because previously, because this was new, because you went, oh, a hole, and now I have to research this hole, and then you found Jinji Ito. That's not true, but I think it's great that that's what led you to us today. Serendipity. Coincidences aren't real. Everything is always intentional, and just read the signs around you. It'll all make sense eventually. Yeah. So thank you for coming on today. And I am super excited to talk about this with you because this is something that you love a lot. Yes, I have several large tomes of his that are just chock full of horrifying and disgusting images. Junji Ito is a renowned horror artist. He has written many short stories as well as long-form series, and all of them, most of them are rather terrifying. He has a series that he writes that is just cat diaries that are about his cats in the same terrifying art style that he has, but it's just like day-to-day stuff about his wife and his friendly little felines. Yeah. This man does love cats. Make no mistake. He loves being spooky and he loves body horror, but this man also loves cats. He's any video you watch of him, he has this extremely wonderful, kind, like face and voice, like a little, I would say characterize him as like slightly soft-spoken. But he is this incredible creator who comes up with things that every time I read something new from him, I'm like, how did he think of that? Because they are as mind-bogglingly weird as they are terrifying. When you actually talked about the hanging balloons, I had never actually read that one. So that was a fun little jaunt for me to go down and find and read. Yeah, I'm glad just like he seems so kind, and that's like this thread that I've seen with a lot of amazing horror creators is they're always the best, kindest people. I mean, like we've talked to David Howard Thornton on the show. He was one of the nicest people I've ever met, funny, charismatic, kind, and also one of the scariest actors I've ever seen. So I'm glad that trend is continuing with Junji Ito. And I think Junji Ito is a name that like you may, if you are not a like super big horror fan, you might recognize his work without recognizing his name. As kind of falling into this kind of greater genre of horror manga, that his imagery and his drawing style and his visual work is very, very famous. But a lot of the times people don't make the connection that all these incredible stories are all from one person. And I think people sometimes use him to like generalize like horror manga or J-horror, which is like, that's such a weird and loaded thing where people say like, oh, like Junji Ito is like exactly what J-horror is, or like represents all J-horror. And like,
saying that J-horror is all one thing or horror manga is all one thing is like saying like, oh, what's American horror? Like it's a lot of different things. And they all have kind of like similar traits. Maybe there's like some threads that you see common, but commonly throughout like J-horror and horror manga. But Junji Ito is his own kind of unique style and his own kind of unique perspective on a very like, I don't even want to call it a niche kind of horror, but it's a very specific kind of horror that Junji Ito does.
I would say that his horror is oftentimes very fantastical, and yet it is like still grounded in the mundane. Mm-hmm. There is an argument that like many of his stories could all exist in the same like quote unquote universe. I'm not a huge fan of like, oh, everything has to be part of the same big like,
yeah, me neither,
interfitting thing. But a lot of them are just stories about like random people going through horrible things. Mm-hmm. Almost always in Japan. But there is like like you said, there are threads that follow through a lot of his work, which I want to touch on. To jump right in after an extended intro, some popular stories listeners may or may not know of that are Junji Ito are Tomi, Uzumaki, Gyo, and Amigara, the Enigma of the Amigara Fault, which Adam talked about. Tomi is about a very beautiful young girl that men see her, fall in love with her, and eventually they become so overwhelmed with desire that they want to cut her into pieces. However, Tomi can't be killed, and each piece will grow a new Tomi, and each one believes that they're original and tries to kill the others. So in the beginning, it was just about like, oh, this girl that got cut up by her classmates and then comes back and acts as if everything is fine. And then it just spirals out into this huge, huge saga about Tomi and all these different things that happen with her.
Yeah, very powerful of her, by the way. Very bold. What is it? What is it? Girl boss?
Girl boss.
Gatekeep. Gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss.
Absolutely. Tomi is all about it. Uzumaki is probably his most famous work. It was adapted into a live-action movie that got panned. And I saw word probably a few years ago that people were making an animated version of it that was very true to the original style of the series. Haven't heard anything about it since, so who knows? But
I want to touch on that, on the film adaptation of Uzumaki, because there have been more of Ito's works that have been made into live action film, right? Or other short films or just live action adaptations. It's not just Uzumaki, right?
I'm honestly not sure. I haven't looked into that as deeply, just because I enjoy reading them so much that I don't really want to see them as films.
That's what I want to talk about. Is that I think one of the most brilliant things Ito does to make his work scary and to make, because a lot of the times it is more difficult to make visual work as frightening as like film or story or like oral storytelling. But Ito does this great thing where he uses the static art and visual art as an advantage rather than compensating for it. Like, firstly and foremostly, nothing about Junji Ito's work is intended on being pleasing or easy to look at. The mundane things, everything kind of makes you uneasy, even the stuff that is quote unquote normal.
Like the way he draws people is very realistic and believable.
Yeah.
But like it's all of his work is in black and white. It really, I honestly like can't really imagine seeing most of it in color because his style is so hinged on the shading that he does and the detail work. Like if you look at one of his large like 2-page spreads of something really scary, there's so much detail in every single stroke of the pen that there's like there's almost no way to replicate that on like screen without just like taking the picture and putting it on the TV.
Yeah. And that's what I think is that the way that he uses the page turn, which is something that is totally independent to horror comics. This isn't even really totally applied to like horror novels or horror stories. The page turn is kind of an advantage that only horror comics and manga can have. It's kind of like their version of the jump scare, right? Because when you flip to the next page in whatever you're reading in the graphic novel, in the manga, in the comic, you immediately start to receive new information from whatever you get on this page turn. And this is similar to film where you can like cut to something and the audience gets new information. But in a film, it is controlled. Like the director and the cinematographer decides exactly when it's revealed, how long you need to see it, and what order you see things. But with manga and with graphic novels and with comics, the reader has total and complete control over the page turn. We could not turn the page. We could, and when we do turn the page, we can look at it for as long or as little time as we like. We can look at things in whatever order that we want. And Ito, in a lot of his stories, I noticed tends to give, and mostly in the short stories, tends to give these panels at the end of a page of a character reacting to something unseen and reacting in horror. And then it's up to us to flip the page to see what the character is looking at, which is brilliant. He uses it all the time. I kept seeing it and seeing it. And it's perfect because it's almost like, as the reader, you kind of feel like you're causing it. Like you almost don't want to turn the page so that you can like save the character or prevent whatever horrifying thing is about to happen. But also, of course, you want to know what they're looking at. I think that's one of the greatest thing. It's kind of like a jump scare, but it's not, because it's way better.
Yeah, I just find myself always returning to his art because of its imaginative quality and the way that he creates suspense in these stories. I would also say Junji Ito is very much the opposite of an over-explainer. Things in Jinji Ito tend to just happen, and there's not really an explanation for the thing. Every now and then there will be, but a lot of the times these terrible things just happen, and there's no rhyme or reason for it. It's just that, like, it's just this sudden intrusion of horror into a mundane life.
Yeah, and anybody who listens to this show knows how much I hate over-explaining in horror, which is why I think Junji Ito's work is so good. He does it like he doesn't over-explain. He barely explains, and that's why I think I really enjoy his short stories so much. And I think short stories work best for horror in general because there's no risk of over-explaining. As when I started researching for this, one of the stories that came up that people recommended was the hanging balloons. And if you have not read, by the way, there's going to be some spoilers for some Junji Ito stories in this episode. I do recommend reading them for yourself before spoiling them for yourself because they're great. But I think the hanging balloons is such a great example of him not over-explaining. If you have not read it, the hanging balloons is about a town that begins to see balloons of faces floating around with nooses tied onto the end of them. And then they start to realize that every balloon matches a person in the town. And eventually that balloon tracks down that person and kills them. There's no explanation of what they are or why they're there. Nobody the town kind of tries to figure it out, but nothing comes up. They don't even get like a hint. And explaining them wouldn't make them any scarier. In fact, it might make them less scary to be like, oh, they're demons or they're whatever. Like, you don't need to they're already scary. You don't need to tell me what they are to make them any scarier.
Yeah, if I saw my giant face in the sky, I'd freak out.
I really like they're scary. I don't need to know that they're aliens. They're already scary.
Yeah, there's the other large story that Junji Ito has is called Gyo, which is about these machines that emerge from the sea that have latched onto the bodies of dead fish, and they're powered by, well, I don't really want to spoil it, but they basically invade Tokyo and then Japan at large. And because they are powered by like decomposing bodies, there is this stench that is described in the whole book. And even though it's just a book and like I can't smell it, like part of the him adding that layer of like an extra sensory experience to imagine, of just like imagining the entirety of your country being blanketed in the smell of like rotting flesh and rotting sea animals is so gross. And like everything's covered in like boils. It's nasty.
Yeah. And I think that's where Jinji, like, because you called his horror fantastical, which it 100% is, but so many of his things feel like realism because he doesn't over explain it. Like maybe not Gyo or the hanging balloons, but the next thing that you have on this list is the Enigma of Amigara Fault, where that is just not explained enough to be like, that could happen. That could be real.
So the smaller stories that I wanted to highlight in this episode are part of two compilations that I have, Fragments of Horror and Smashed. They are, they're all like, most of them are just like little standalone stories. And a lot of the time his characters never reappear. Like Gentle Goodbye, like you never see those characters ever again. His longer form, like Uzumaki and Gyo and Tomi, like have protagonists that kind of stay through. But even in Tomi, the like quote unquote protagonist changes every few chapters. So the first story that I have is called Gentle Goodbye. It's a ghost story. Junji Ito doesn't tend to do a lot of ghost stories, but this one is about a family in Japan that when someone dies, the whole family gets together at the funeral and they pray. And through the connected just energy of all of them praying, they create an image of the person who died, who will then continue to live with the family in place of the person who died and slowly fade so that people get to say goodbye to this person. Like it's this incredible idea of like how to deal with grief. And then there's a twist in it because the main character is a girl who marries into this family and is dealing with these ghosts and kind of freaking out, but like getting used to it. But her thing is that she has these dreams every single night about her father dying. And so she asks the family, like, oh, if my dad dies, would you make an after image of her? And they reject that idea because they only do it for people of the family. And so it kind of just follows her life. Like these, you just get like little snippets of her life after she gets married. And then she sees her husband meeting with a woman in the street. And she says, like, confronts him, like, what are you cheating on me? And he says, like, oh, eventually I'm going to marry her. And like this just drops out of nowhere. And then he has to tell the protagonist of the story that she actually was hit by a car on their wedding day. And he asked his family to create an after image of her.
Yeah, she's an after image.
Like that sort of like twist you don't see coming at all because you think it's just like, oh, it's a ghost story about like living in this haunted house that isn't actually haunted because people like made the ghosts to be there.
Yeah. There's like, this was the story that when I was reading, I think not only is the twist introduced so well, but before like he explains it, before he like fully explains the twist, he gives you just enough information to piece it together for yourself. Like the panel where he says like, I'm going to marry her someday. I'm gonna marry her soon. I was like, oh, she's an after image. She's dead. She's dead. She's dead. She's dead. And then I turned the page and she was dead. Which I think is so like, it gives the reader the satisfaction of like, I figured that out when no, you most certainly did not. not until it was revealed for you. And this one like it was weird because this is one of the first ones that I read and it was like very tragic and sad. In a way that like some of his other work is, but not like a lot of his work is sad, but not quite in like the I'm gonna like start tearing up kind of sad and tragic that this one is. I consider this to be of the ones that I read like the least frightening, but also one of the most impactful.
Yeah, there's another similar story called Roar, which is about like this man seeing ghosts of a flood that happened like years and years ago. And like it feels like Junji Ito's stories that are actually ghost stories are more about the like sadness of ghosts and like the tragedy of losing people. Mm-hmm. And for the main character to be someone who was lost is just like, it breaks my heart. And at the same time, it is fascinating to see like the range of stories that this man creates because Junji Ito is sort of the, I guess, old school idea of auteur who like he has the idea, he writes the whole thing and he draws the whole thing. Mm-hmm. It's this like one person coming up with it that makes it so strong. The same. Devin and I were talking about this the other day, but just like a lot of the times you can tell when stuff was written by committee, like Frozen or whatever. You can tell it was written by 12 people and like was rewritten a ton of times. Whereas like Junji Ito's stuff is like it's him, like it's just him making this incredible stuff.
And it feels so centralized and personal, even when he's talking about like a whole town or in some cases all of Japan. It still feels so grounded in like in centralized in these characters and so personal. And personalization and the sense of self is something that I noticed is like a common thread of his work. I noticed it in this, and then also both Hanging Balloons and in the Enigma of Amigara Fault. This idea of something that was meant for you. But something that is horrifying that was meant for you, something that is yours, which I think is like, we always talk about horror playing on like what the fears of the public are, and the fear of self and the fear of not knowing yourself or the fear of something horrible within yourself is not something that is often explored in horror, mostly because it's so hard to do well. It kind of falls into the realm of it's almost the anti-cosmic horror, when that cosmic horror is kind of, it's weird because you kind of see these kind of cosmic horror kind of influences in his work. But if cosmic horror is kind of the fear of your own insignificance in comparison to the size of the universe, this kind of horror that Junji Ito does is this fear of something within yourself that is terrible, and it's just as cosmic as the other thing is, but it's almost the opposite, and it's very interesting in that way.
Yeah. It's the fear of like this could happen to you.
Yeah.
Which is like a lot of the times when you indulge in fantasy, no matter what the media you're consuming is, there is the feeling of like, this isn't happening to me, but this could happen to me, maybe if I imagined it. Whereas like Jinji Ito comes at you full force and is like, this could happen to you. And it freaks you out.
And I think that's what scared me so much about Amigara Fault when I saw it on Tumblr as a 13-year-old, which, by the way, if you have not read Amigara Fault, it's the comic about the holes in the side of the mountain that are shaped like people, and they are compelled to enter those holes. And it was hugely popular on like Tumblr and Twitter from the years like
it's definitely been memed on. If you've seen the panel of like a guy in his underwear crawling into a human-shaped hole, he goes like, "This is my hole. It was made for me." That's definitely been reposted a billion times.
Yeah, but that scared me so much as like a teen seeing it, because I was like, okay, even if this exact scenario could, like, we all love to watch horror movies and go, well, I would simply shoot the monster with a big gun. But if I kept thinking, like, if I was in this situation, I would, like, there's nothing stopping me from crawling into, like, these people are getting compelled to crawl into these holes, like, and they can't stop it. So this would, I would probably crawl into the hole. Like, that's just how it would be. And I don't like that. I don't like to think about that.
Yeah. The next short story I recommended is Blackbird, also in Fragments of Horror. And
so much crazy.
This one, it definitely just kind of jumps into the monster stuff. I love Junji Ito's monsters and demons because a lot of the times they are very, like, they either have a human face or a human body and like a non-human face. They're these There's another. The Soichi's haunted house has this enormous, freaky demon woman with huge eyes and giant teeth and like a huge forehead, and her proportions are all freaky and wrong. But Blackbird starts with a hiker discovering another hiker whose legs have been broken, and they take him to the hospital and they ask him like, "Oh, when did you go up the mountain?" And if they find out that he's actually been like laying there for months, and the hiker tells the man who finds him, and these characters are just random people, which is part of the scary personalization of just like, it's just a guy. He's not special. He's just like, oh, he's a hiker. He tells a story about being approached by a huge woman bird thing that has giant lips and like slicked black hair, and she's chewing something and she spits it into his mouth, and it's the most delicious meat he's ever tasted, and that's how he survives. But the bird follows him to the hospital, and every single night is still pushing food into his mouth, but now it tastes disgusting. And I almost don't even want to reveal the twist of this one.
I want to talk about it though.
So she is feeding him this meat, and eventually the hiker like leaves the hospital and then goes missing again, and they find his skeleton that has been like picked clean on the side of a mountain. And it turns out that the meat that she was feeding him was his own flesh. And so there's this like
from the mountain, like there's two. It's crazy.
Yeah, there's like this is the unexplained thing, which is like so fascinating. Of at the same time he was being sustained on like his own flesh, but she wasn't biting him. And like she kidnaps him when he's hiking and like brings him up to the mountain in the ending of the story, and like is biting off pieces of him each night. And so it's this like gross mother bird who is like both killing and sustaining him at the same time.
Yeah, and like the first of all, that the fact that he doesn't explain how he both exists on the mountain and with broken legs in the forest at the same time. And frankly, it doesn't matter. Like if he had gone, oh, well, and then the time loop, like nobody would have cared. It's fine. We don't need to know it for it to be scary. And then also we're back to this idea of personalization, that like he is being sustained off of himself, but that is also killing him. And this kind of sealed fate of doom where like, the only reason that he had survived that long is because that he was dying on the mountain, and that in order for like that to come to pass, he has to get picked clean on the mountain by being fed himself, essentially. And then at the very, very end, right, the original protagonist is fed by this bird woman, kind of in this final death. Yeah.
He also falls off of like a ledge on a mountain while on a hiking trip and sees the bird woman approaching him chewing something.
Yeah. Which is very like Final Destination, like here we go again.
Cyclical. It's just going to keep happening.
Yeah. And that's also why like I think what's so great about him turning this mundane thing into being something scary. And that's why movies like Jaws are so iconic, because it made us like, did it make us afraid of this exact situation? No, we didn't think that this is going to happen, but it did make us afraid of the water. Like, am I not going to go hiking because I'm afraid I'm going to break my legs and a bird woman's going to come get me? No, but I'm going to think about it the whole time I'm hiking. Like, that's exactly what, and the same thing. I think about Jaws the whole time I'm in the ocean. That's precisely how horror should continue to scare you.
Yeah, it gets in you, and it's the thing of I have that thing with Alien. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. But if I think, when I'm laying down in my bed, if I think for 1 second, what if there's a face hugger at like the foot of my bed and it jumps on my face? I'm freaked out, and like I can't, and I have to hum something or just like force myself to think about something else.
Yeah.
'Cause the stuff that scares you is just like, the second it has a toe in the door, it just kind of like floods in.
Yeah. And your brain lets that happen. Like, even though rationally, of course, this is not going to happen, that doesn't stop your brain from creating these cool stories about it.
So the next story in Fragments of Horror is called Whispering Woman. And it centers around this young woman. Almost all of the protagonists of Junji Ito's stories are like young men and women. And it centers around this like anxious young woman who is always asking questions like, should I sit? Should I stand? Should I eat? What should I eat? Should I go outside? Should I stay inside? It's just like this never ending constant stream of indecision. I believe it's I think it's because like her mother's absent. I don't exactly remember. So a woman shows up to this household in response to their ad because they need a new nanny because every single one of them has like quit the job one day in, and she is perfect. She answers all of the girls' questions. She like stays at her side 24/7. And the anxious young woman is like flourishing now because this woman is just like spending all of her constant energy from morning till night, just answering her questions and guiding her through life. And day by day, the new nanny gets like closer and closer to this girl as time goes by, just like clinging to her shoulder and whispering in her ear. And in Junji Ito's art, like you can see like the hollows of like her gone. Cheeks and her eyes and the way that like her body is like kind of starving and starting to decompose even though she's still alive. And then eventually she dies because they find out that she had an abusive partner at home who all he did was take her money and beat her. And then the next day after she's dead, the father of the anxious girl is freaked out because he's like, I don't know what we're going to do. My daughter is going to go back to being completely unable to live on her own. And the girl just kind of laughs and says, what are you talking about? She's right here. She's right by my shoulder. Like she's whispering in my ear. And later, the father comes across his daughter stabbing the ground and saying like this harder, or should I do it like this? And the daughter comes back that night covered in blood, and she says like, I did it. I did what she told me to do. And it turns out that she killed the abuser of the woman who was murdered.
Yeah, which I know is supposed to be scary, but also like, hell yeah.
I didn't. It's not all that scary. This is just one of those stories that like stays with me because it has this strange. It just has like this strange premise of the like person who just like doesn't know how to do with it, and this woman just shows up and is like, oh, I can do it. And like it's like trying to puzzle out like what the meaning or like thesis is of this story always. Like that's something I find very interesting about Jinji Ito stories is like, it's like, what is he saying? Like this woman has like devoted herself to serving other people, and eventually she like wore herself away, and even as a spirit she's like still helping this young girl. But like, was this all a ploy to get revenge?
Yeah, like did she know that this was going to happen? That's why she attached herself. I found this one strangely comforting. As I was reading it, like I know I was supposed to be like, ooh, spooky ghost, scary, but the whole time I was like, I would like to have just somebody gently touching my shoulder, telling me what I should do throughout the day. Like right now, I'm like I'm making a character for a D&D campaign, and I can't decide if I should be a monk or a bard, and I really just want somebody gently touching my shoulder, whispering, telling me to just play the bard. I think that would be really nice.
Yeah, so much of Junji Ito's there's a lot of like very pretty young girls that in Junji Ito's stories that are either like horrible that are horrible, not monsters, but like there's something wrong with them.
Yeah.
Like Tomi. Like Tomi is supposed to be like the most beautiful girl you've ever seen. And like all these young women who like horrible things just happen to them, is once again back in that like, oh, these are just normal people, and like these terrifying things can just happen to like these normal girls who are just like living their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Like so much of Junji Ito's stories just like take place in like a city, and like people just like live in apartments, and it's all very modern looking. It doesn't take place in like an old Gothic castle or there are some that are like, oh, they're in like remote-ish villages. Like Uzumaki takes place in a strange little village by the sea. But it's very like modern. Like people just walk, like there are cars and telephone wires. Like people go to school. Like it's very, very, it's so grounded in that setting that he can just go bonkers with like the concepts.
Yeah, it's like he doesn't use a traditional horror aesthetic, and he doesn't need to, because he works in the mundane. Even though a lot of like, if we think about like pulp fiction and like, I mean like pulp, not the movie Pulp Fiction, but like pulp like comic books and stuff, and kind of what we think of as like classic horror graphic novels or comics. They kind of really heavily rely on a horror aesthetic, on traditional kind of horror characters, vampire, zombies, ghosts, et cetera, et cetera. Junji Ito doesn't really need that, because he's so good at making the mundane insanely uneasy.
Yeah. The next one is also a really strange story. It's called Ghosts of Primetime, and it's about these two women comedians who use their spirits to actually like fly into the audience and tickle the spirits of audience members in order to make them laugh. So like none of their jokes are actually funny, but they are actually somehow able to manipulate their own spirit and cast it out of their body and interact with other spirits. And they kill people by making them laugh so hard that they stop breathing, and when they die, their face is just fixed in like this huge, wide, open grin. And the protagonist is a young man who can see spirits, which is why he can show the audience. So the audience reading can see. At first, you're just like watching this bad comic show, and then you get shown what he's seeing, which is like these. What's the word? Not malignant. These malicious spirits.
Malicious, yeah.
These malicious these malicious women who are using their souls to do this evil and to get power. The reason it's called Ghosts of Primetime is because they say like, we're gonna go on national television and we're gonna like capture and like make everyone in Japan laugh. Like, you don't know anything about these women, but they are able to know that the protagonist is not affected by them, and then they find out where he lives and just like come after him because he stands in their way.
I've always loved horror stories or horror narratives that are about like getting on TV to like hypnotize people or just to do something horrible on television.
It feels very Scooby-Doo.
It is very Scooby-Doo. I was going to say there's a Jimmy Neutron episode where this happens.
Oh my God.
With the alien grandma. But I'm also thinking about, and like, this is a terrible movie, but Truth or Dare, bad movie, terrible, bad movie. But I like the ending a lot because I don't actually like it because it's a stupid thing for her to do. But I think in another movie it would work, where at the end of the movie, in order to get herself out of like the Truth or Dare like loop, she like takes a YouTube video like in asking Truth or Dare so that everybody who watches it is now involved in the game. And like in the premise of the film, that was a stupid thing for her to do, and there are way better ways she could have solved that problem. But I think as like a thing, I like that a lot.
I'm going to go viral.
Yeah. That's a bad movie. It's a terrible movie. If you ever want to watch a bad horror movie, watch Truth or Dare.
Oh my God. There's so many bad horror movies.
Yeah, that's a good pick though.
It's also Ghost of Primetime is also the protagonist is another Junji Ito thing is like protagonists a lot of the times can't escape their fate. Like even if they want to, even if they really, really want to like run away or somehow stop what's happening, there is no escape. There's no way to avoid it. The fact that they just like show up at his house because they have this like soul charisma and are able to just like manipulate people into doing what they want. There's a lot of that in different stories, especially in Tomi, of just like people using whatever power they have to just like make things happen. And there's not a lot of explanation of like how they did it. It's just like they're at your house now. Yeah. And it's that sudden invasion of like you think you're safe, but you're not.
Yeah. And Jinji Ito also doesn't do the thing where he gives the protagonist like a reason to be targeted. Like he doesn't do the thing where I'm like, oh, I'll make the people that die or the people that get wrapped up in this like slightly unlikable so that way the audience doesn't feel as bad. These are completely normal people who did not do anything wrong and just have these horrible things happen to them, which makes it all the scarier.
There are a couple people in some Junji Ito stories who do bad things, and they do deserve their fate.
Okay, yeah, them too.
But like the fact that the guy, the young boy, not young boy, the fact that like the teen in Ghost of Primetime,
lad,
yeah, the lad, the fact that he can see spirits is just like he just happens to be able to see spirits. As if that is like also a normal thing, like in Jinji Ito's world of like, well, some people can see spirits. So the last story is called Earthbound, which you didn't get to read. But it is about a phenomenon that starts happening in Japan where people become rooted to a certain spot. Be it like in a field or in their own house. One young boy is like rooted to a spot like behind his house near some trees. And slowly their bodies start to solidify and become basically rock. So there are scenes of people trying to remove them from where they're standing, like with a crane, and they just fracture and fall apart. And then you see like a truck bed of just like these fractured rock things that look like statues, but they're real people who have just somehow fallen to this fate. And it turns out that people are earthbound because of a guilty conscience. It's not a disease. You can't catch it. It is because they have an association with that spot where they did something wrong and it like roots them there and they can't escape it. It's that inability to run away from this fate despite the work of the protagonist who's just a young woman who is trying to assist with this epidemic as it's classified in the story. One of the young boy that she first tries to help, it turns out that he is standing right near the grave of his dog. And it's because he killed the dog in like a fit of rage. And you see flashes of people in the beginning, like standing in these spots and you don't know why they're there. And then later you see those same people, but now they're at a different angle and you can see some information that tells you like why they're rooted there. There's one of an old, like middle-aged-ish man just standing on the side of the road. And then you figure out that he actually like hit and ran a child there. He just like ran over a child. And then his punishment for that is to basically become a stone statue. And it's this idea of phenomenon and transformation that also comes up a lot in Jinji Ito of like, human bodies transforming into something else. Becoming rock is not the biggest leap he makes. There are people who turn into snails in Uzumaki, which is, for some reason, yucks me out more than like a lot of other stuff. Like a lot of body horror stuff, I really just enjoy a lot. People turning into like snails and slugs, every time I watch their eyes like pop out into eye stalks, I'm like, ugh.
Fair. There was I remember what books they were in. There used to be this, tangent. There used to be this short horror series for kids. It was the Weenies. They were called the Weenies. One of them was called like Curse the Campfire Weenies. One was like Invasion of the Road Weenies. I'm unlocking these memories as I speak. But there were a bunch of these books. I got them at the Scholastic Book Fair. And one of the stories was about these kids that like they went to go play in like a witch's garden or whatever. And something happens, but she turns them into snails. And then she pours salt on one of the kids after she turns them into snails.
That's
then
horrifying.
The kid dries up and dies. So I understand.
So those are my just like short list of recommendations of short stories. I would recommend like all of his short story anthologies. His work, I would say, like, because you can read comics, I feel very fast. I definitely just like kind of devour them very, very quickly. It took me a little while to like chip away through Uzumaki and Tomi because those are like big anthologies of like years long series that he wrote and drew.
And these are the ones that I started on too. And again, if you haven't, I think a really great starting one is Amigara Fault. If you haven't read it, or if you have in the past and didn't know it was him, go back and look at it again, because that's exactly what I did when I started this. And I realized exactly how brilliant it was. These are all the ones that I started on. And it's a great, just like, he's so good at what he does.
These are also some of the least body horror-y of his stories. If you do not vibe with like people's heads eating into themselves, or like a ton of people like grossly shoved into like one mass of nasty bodies. If you do not like body horror, these have not the I would say of all of his stories, these are very limited on body horror.
A little bit tamer. It does get a little yucko down the line, but I know y'all who are listening to the show, you guys are in it for the body horror stuff. And his anthology is huge. You're always going to be finding stuff from him that you didn't know was there. So definitely go and check out more of it, and let us know your favorites. But Ezra, thank you so much. I guess it's time to grab our, what do you call that hat that has the light on it? The helmet with the light on it? The miner's helmet?
The miner's helmet?
We got to grab our miner's helmet and our grappling hook and go into that hole and go find Devin.
Oh, yeah.
But
he should have like slid down to the other side by now, which is...
Like, I know how that story ends, but in my brain, when you said that, it was just a slide.
Oh, yeah.
He just kind of plops out of at the end. We'll go fish him out. But thank you so much for coming on today and talking to us about Junji Ito. It was wonderful having you, and I hope we can have you on again soon.
Yes, I have another episode idea cooking on the back burner. Just because Resident Evil 8 came out, and I am remembering how much that series is a wild ride. It started out as horror, came back to horror, now it's going back a little bit into action stuff, but that's a topic for another day.
It's got a big, tall vampire lady in it, and isn't that...
She's wonderful. Yeah.
Do you have any of your stuff you would like to plug? Where can our listeners find you?
I have a professional website at EzraFisher.com. You and I are currently 4 out of almost 5, almost on the 5th week of our Play by Mail series. That has been an amazing experience, a pleasure to work on. That has been. Oh my God.
It happens. It be like that.
It's happening. It's going on. I'm going to be working on a festival down at the Lower East Side this summer, which should be fun. And I'm just like waiting for more details on that, as well as just as well as other projects.
Yeah, go head to Ezra's website, check out some of his awesome work. He is a awesome lighting designer, awesome writer. Go check out some of his work there. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rate and review on iTunes or whatever your other podcasting platform, and tell a friend. It really is the best way to get the word out about the show. Word of mouth is the best way. And share with a friend who likes to get scared. If you would like to follow us on social media, we are on Instagram at Great Scream Pod, as well as Twitter, Great Scream Pod, and more at Facebook at The Great American Scream, but much more on Twitter. Please send us your favorite Junji Ito stories. You can tweet at us using the hashtag TGAS. And as always, if you have something that you would like to hear about on the show, let us know, because your suggestion may become the topic for a future episode. We'd also like to thank Stevie Viola, who does the intro music for us and the outro music, and also Michael Seguto, who records our introduction bit. And also, you can check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/greatscreenpod to get your episodes a day early, as well as a lot of bonus content. And thank you to all of our patrons currently. Thank you to all of our patrons, but wanted to shout out those patrons at the Man in the Fields level and higher. You can tell that Devin usually does these, because I realized mid-episode that I have to do these, but hopefully I have this list right. So thank you to Regina, Ben, Bree, Gail, Joyce, Melinda, and Chris. Thank you. So for that, I have been Adam O'Connell.
I have been Ezra Fisher. Happy Mother's Day, by the way.
Happy Mother's Day, and hopefully you have been spooked. Don't spook your moms, but you're not going to be listening to this on Mother's Day, because we're recording it on Mother's Day. But hopefully in the past you have not spooked your moms. Spook safely out there.